Tap scary true security guard horror stories. Someone was living inside the hospital. My name is Marcus Hill. I was 42 years old when this happened, working the night shift as a security guard at an aging hospital in Detroit, Michigan. I'd been in hospital security for almost 9 years. Most people think it's an exciting job filled with emergencies and dramatic confrontations. The truth is, it's mostly routine. You walk the same hallways over and over, check locked doors, monitor cameras, respond to the occasional alarm, and write reports that no one ever reads unless something goes wrong. The hospital where I worked had once been one of the busiest in the city. Years earlier, a newer medical tower had opened across the street, and most departments were relocated there. The original building remained open, but nearly half of it had been shut down permanently. The entire East Wing sat empty. 5 floors of abandoned patient rooms, unused storage areas, old offices, and equipment that no one had bothered to move. The active West Wing still housed patients, but after midnight, the entire building became eerily quiet. Not scary, just empty. I worked from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. Every shift started the same way. I checked in with the evening supervisor, tested my radio, inspected my flashlight, logged into the CCTV system, and reviewed the night's patrol schedule. My first patrol usually started around 11:30. The hospital still felt alive then. Nurses exchanged shifts. Doctors hurried through the hallways. Families whispered in waiting rooms. Cleaning crews pushed noisy carts through the corridors. But by 1 in the morning, everything changed. The lights dimmed. Most conversations disappeared. Only the constant hum of the ventilation system, the occasional beep from heart monitors, and the distant squeak of rolling hospital beds remained. I always followed the same route. Pharmacy storage, mechanical rooms, the underground tunnel connecting both buildings. Then the closed East Wing. That part of the hospital always felt different. Not because it seemed haunted, because it felt forgotten. Every hallway looked frozen in time. Patient rooms still had empty beds. Old signs still hung outside offices. Dust settled on equipment that hadn't been touched in years. The ventilation system echoed through the empty corridors, making the building feel much larger than it really was. I'd learned every normal sound inside that hospital, which is why I noticed when something changed. It started with something so small that I laughed it off. My food disappeared. Every night I brought a sandwich and left it in the security break room refrigerator until around 3 in the morning. One night it was gone. I figured someone from housekeeping had accidentally taken it. It wasn't a big deal. The following week, it happened again. Then my yogurt disappeared. A bottle of orange juice vanished 2 nights later. I joked about it with Linda, one of the senior nurses. "Guess we've got a sandwich thief," she laughed. "If they're only stealing lunch, let them have it." Neither of us thought much about it. Until the lights. One night I finished checking an old records room on the 4th floor of the East Wing. I clearly remember switching the lights off before leaving. About 20 minutes later, I walked past the hallway again. The lights were back on. I stopped. I was absolutely certain I had turned them off. I walked inside. The room was empty. Every cabinet remained locked. Nothing appeared disturbed. I switched the lights off again and continued my patrol. The same thing happened twice more that week, not always in the same room. Sometimes it was an old examination room, sometimes a storage closet, sometimes an unused office. The maintenance department inspected the electrical system. Everything tested normally. Then the service doors started appearing unlocked. These weren't doors that blew open because of air pressure. They required keycard access. I'd lock one during my patrol. 40 minutes later, it would be unlatched. I began checking the electronic access logs. Every secured door recorded the employee badge used to open it. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed several entries around 3:12 a.m. Instead of employee names, the system only displayed an old badge number. IT told me it was probably leftover data from an outdated employee database. It sounded reasonable. Still, something about it bothered me. A few nights later, I found an empty bottle of water inside an unused storage room. The next night, a package of crackers. Then canned soup. Then disposable utensils. Nothing expensive. Nothing stolen from patients. Just ordinary food. The kind someone trying to survive might carry. I started searching more carefully. Behind shelves, inside maintenance closets, old offices, mechanical spaces, every place large enough for someone to hide. I never found anyone, but I kept finding signs that someone had been there. A folded blanket, a worn towel, flattened cardboard arranged like a sleeping mat. Each discovery looked recent, yet every room was empty by the time I arrived. I changed my patrol schedule. Sometimes I'd take the stairs instead of the elevator. Sometimes I'd reverse my entire route. I hoped I'd catch whoever was moving through the building. I never did. I always seemed to miss them by only a few minutes. One night I noticed dusty footprints leading into an abandoned supply room on the 5th floor. There was only one set. They went inside. None came back out. I searched every corner. The windows were sealed shut. The ventilation ducts were far too small for anyone to crawl through. Nothing. I stood there staring at the floor, trying to convince myself I'd missed something obvious. Eventually, I decided someone must have accidentally disturbed the dust before housekeeping cleaned part of the hallway. Even as I wrote that explanation in my report, I didn't believe it. After several weeks, I stopped talking about these incidents with my coworkers. I was beginning to question my own memory. Had I really locked that door? Had I actually turned those lights off? Or had I simply convinced myself that I had? Sleep deprivation can play tricks on people. Working overnight for years certainly doesn't help. I started carrying a small notebook. Every room I checked, I wrote down the exact time. Door locked, lights off, nothing unusual. The notebook made things worse. Patterns started appearing. Most of the strange discoveries happened between 3 and 4 in the morning. The same service doors kept being opened. The unidentified keycard entries appeared during nearly identical time windows. Linda eventually asked why I looked exhausted all the time. I just shrugged. Not sleeping well. That was easier than trying to explain something I couldn't even prove to myself. One night I was watching the CCTV monitors when I saw something that made me freeze. At the far end of a hallway, in the closed east wing, something crossed the camera. Not clearly. Just a dark shape moving quickly across the frame. I immediately rewound the footage. Nothing. I played it again. Compression artifacts, camera glitch, or maybe someone. I honestly couldn't tell. I grabbed my flashlight and headed upstairs. The hallway was empty, but sitting on a windowsill was a plastic water bottle. When I picked it up, it was still cold. That bothered me more than anything else, because if someone had left it there, they couldn't have been far away. Or maybe it had simply been sitting beneath an air vent. I honestly don't know. Hospital management eventually contacted the police. Together we searched the entire east wing, every room, every closet, every maintenance area. Nothing. The officers believed a homeless person might occasionally enter the building and leave before security could find them. That explanation made sense, except the strange incidents continued. A backup security radio disappeared from our office. 2 nights later, I found it sitting on a shelf inside an abandoned supply room. No one admitted moving it. I started feeling like someone wanted me to know they were there. Not attacking me, not stealing valuables, just leaving enough evidence to make me question everything. Several months later, construction crews began removing sections of the ceiling during a renovation project. One worker called for me. "Hey, you need to see this." Above the suspended ceiling was a narrow crawl space running alongside old ventilation ducts. It wasn't tall enough to stand in, but it was large enough for someone to crawl through. Inside, police found several blankets, empty water bottles, canned food, a cheap flashlight, extra clothing, a plastic coffee cup, and a notebook. Every page was blank. There was no wallet, no identification, no photographs, no fingerprints that investigators could identify. Nothing that revealed who had stayed there, or how long they had been living above the ceiling. Some items were covered in dust. Others looked surprisingly clean. Police documented everything and opened a brief investigation. No missing persons matched the evidence. No surveillance footage ever showed anyone entering or leaving the crawl space. No one could explain how the space had remained hidden for so long. A few weeks later, the case was quietly closed. The official conclusion stated only that an unknown individual had likely occupied the space at some point before it was discovered. No suspect was ever identified. Even now, years later, I still don't know what really happened. Maybe someone had secretly been living inside that hospital for months, maybe even years. Maybe exhaustion from working permanent night shifts caused me to connect unrelated events into one frightening story. Or maybe someone knew exactly how close they could stay without ever being seen. I only know one thing. In nearly a decade of working hospital security, I've never experienced another building that made me feel like I was sharing it with someone I'd never actually met. And every time I hear the low hum of an old hospital ventilation system, I think about that narrow space above the ceiling. A place just large enough to hide a person, but far too small to hold all the questions that were never answered. Scary, true security guard horror stories. The parking garage, level 7. My name is Ethan Carter. I was 29 years old when this happened, working the overnight shift as a security guard for a 7-story parking garage attached to a large business complex in Phoenix, Arizona. Most people assume a parking garage is one of the safest places a security guard can work. Nothing ever happens there. At least, that's what I thought during my first few months. The garage served 3 office towers during the day. By 6 in the evening, thousands of employees drove home, leaving behind only a handful of vehicles belonging to cleaning crews, IT staff, and the occasional executive working late. By midnight, the entire structure felt abandoned. Concrete walls reflected every sound. The ventilation fans droned endlessly through the open levels. Motion-activated lights flickered on and off as I walked through empty rows of parking spaces. Every footstep echoed several seconds longer than it should have. My shift ran from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. Every night followed the same routine. Check the entrance gates. Verify parking tickets for late arrivals. Respond to intercom calls from drivers who lost their tickets. Monitor more than 100 CCTV cameras. Patrol each level on foot. Document abandoned vehicles. Lock maintenance areas before sunrise. It was repetitive, predictable. Exactly the kind of job where even the smallest change stood out immediately. Level 7 was always my least favorite, not because anything bad had ever happened there, because it was almost always empty. The top floor was partially uncovered, exposed to the desert air. Only a few dozen parking spaces existed there, mostly reserved for corporate executives who rarely worked overnight. On most shifts, I could walk the entire level without seeing a single vehicle. That's why I noticed the gray sedan. The first time I saw it, it was parked in space 714 near the northeast corner. Nothing unusual. The second night, it was in space 706. 3 nights later, it had moved to the opposite side of the level. I didn't think much of it. People moved their cars. That was normal. Except, I never saw the sedan enter the garage, and I never saw it leave. Every vehicle entering after business hours passed through an automated gate that recorded license plates and timestamps. The gray sedan never appeared in the nightly logs. At first, I assumed the system had missed it. License plate readers occasionally failed. Then I reviewed the previous week's records. Nothing. No entry. No exit. Yet the car continued appearing in different parking spaces every few nights. I finally mentioned it over the radio. Control, do you have a record for a gray Honda Accord on level 7? Static crackled before dispatch answered. Negative. What's the plate? I read the number. A minute later, dispatch replied, no overnight entry on file. Maybe it came in during business hours? Possible. That explanation made sense. Until the following Monday. Every employee vehicle left by 8 in the evening. I watched the entire garage clear out. The gray sedan wasn't there. At 1:15 a.m. during my routine patrol, it was parked on level 7. I stared at it for nearly a minute. I knew it hadn't been there earlier. I checked the hood. Cold. No signs it had recently been driven. The windows were darkly tinted. I walked around the car. No visible damage. No personal belongings inside that I could see. Everything looked perfectly ordinary, except for one detail. There was a thin layer of dust across the trunk, interrupted by fresh handprints. Someone had touched the car recently. I reviewed the CCTV footage. Every camera covering the ramps leading to level 7 looked normal, except for one problem. Between 12:57 a.m. and 1:03 a.m., 3 cameras briefly lost their video feed. Only 6 minutes. The maintenance department blamed an intermittent network issue. The timing bothered me. Over the following weeks, I began documenting the sedan. Location, time, parking space. weather conditions, anything that might explain what I was seeing. The pattern became stranger. The vehicle moved every few nights, always after midnight, always during brief gaps in camera coverage, sometimes only a few spaces away, sometimes across the entire level, but never while anyone was watching. I reported it to my supervisor. He looked through my notes. "You sure you're not just remembering the parking spot wrong?" I wasn't. I had photographs, timestamps, written reports. Still, there wasn't enough evidence to justify opening a formal investigation. The car wasn't reported stolen, it wasn't blocking traffic, it wasn't abandoned long enough to be towed. Officially, there was no problem. Unofficially, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began changing my patrol schedule. Instead of visiting level 7 once every hour, I went at random intervals, sometimes every 20 minutes, sometimes after only 5. Sometimes I waited quietly inside the stairwell overlooking the top floor. Nothing. The sedan never moved while I was there, but sooner or later, it would be somewhere else. One rainy night, rare for Phoenix, I noticed muddy footprints beside the driver's door. Only one set. They appeared to approach the vehicle. None led away. I searched the entire level. Nothing. The stairwells were empty. The elevators hadn't been used. The maintenance rooms were locked. I couldn't explain it. I photographed the footprints. By morning, they had dried and faded into the concrete. Another week passed. Then dispatch called over the radio. "Ethan, can you verify an abandoned vehicle complaint?" "It depends which one." The gray sedan. Someone working early morning maintenance had reported that the car hadn't moved for several days. I almost laughed. If only they knew. I completed the paperwork. According to company policy, abandoned vehicles required a warning notice before towing. I placed the notice beneath the windshield wiper. The following night, the notice was gone. The car remained. No one reported removing it. No one admitted seeing anyone near it. The windshield was perfectly clean. I checked every available camera. Again, there was a brief recording gap. 5 minutes. Enough time for someone to approach the vehicle unseen. I replaced one of the recording servers. They assured us the problem had been fixed. It wasn't. The outages continued. Always short, always unpredictable, always affecting the cameras covering level 7. Months passed. By then, everyone in the security office knew about my mystery car. Most of them thought I was reading too much into coincidence. Maybe they were right. Working nights can do strange things to your mind. When every shift feels identical, your brain starts noticing patterns that may not actually exist. I tried convincing myself of that. Then one evening, I checked the license plate through law enforcement records after obtaining approval from local police during a joint property investigation. The result surprised everyone. The vehicle was legally registered, not stolen, not expired. Registered to a man named David Reynolds. The problem was, David Reynolds had been reported missing nearly 6 years earlier. His disappearance had never been solved. The detective handling the inquiry contacted us the following week. Forensic technicians processed the vehicle. No usable fingerprints, no recent DNA, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been living inside it. The ignition showed no damage. There was nothing inside except an old parking receipt and a faded pair of sunglasses. Investigators reviewed every available surveillance recording. They discovered the same thing I had. Brief technical interruptions. Just enough missing footage to prevent anyone from seeing exactly when or how the sedan changed locations. No witness ever reported driving it. No employee admitted moving it. No keys were recovered. Eventually, the vehicle was removed for further examination. The parking garage returned to normal. The strange camera outages stopped shortly afterward. Or maybe I simply stopped paying attention. A few months later, I asked one of the detectives if they had ever solved the case. He shook his head. The car raised more questions than it answered. That was all he would say. The official investigation eventually ended without identifying who had been moving the sedan inside the garage. No criminal charges were filed. No suspect was ever named. The missing persons case remained open. Even now, years later, I still think about level 7 whenever I park inside a concrete garage late at night. Sometimes I wonder if someone had been using that structure as a hiding place for months. Maybe years. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation buried somewhere in the missing minutes of corrupted surveillance footage. Or maybe I simply became obsessed with solving a mystery that was never meant to have an answer. I only know what I personally saw. A gray sedan that somehow kept changing parking spaces, without anyone ever seeing it arrive, without anyone ever seeing it leave, and with every investigation leading to one unsettling conclusion. The car was real. The missing owner was real. Everything else disappeared into 6 minutes of missing footage that no one could ever recover. Scary, true security guard horror stories, every night at 3:17 a.m. My name is Ryan Foster. I was 37 years old when this happened, working the overnight shift as a security guard at a large logistics distribution center outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Most people imagine warehouses as quiet places after dark. They're not. Even at 3 in the morning, a distribution center is a machine that never really stops moving. Semi-trucks arrive on tight schedules, forklifts move freight between loading docks. Conveyor systems hum through endless rows of pallets. Refrigeration units run constantly. Security alarms monitor every fence, gate, trailer, and warehouse entrance. My job wasn't exciting. It was predictable, and that's exactly why I noticed when something stopped following the routine. I worked from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. Every shift began the same way. I received a briefing from the evening supervisor, checked my patrol vehicle, tested my flashlight and radio, reviewed incoming truck schedules, and logged into the security management system. The distribution center covered nearly 60 acres. There were 4 warehouse buildings, more than 80 loading docks, hundreds of parked trailers, miles of chain-link fencing topped with security wire, over 200 surveillance cameras. Thermal cameras monitored the outer perimeter. Motion sensors protected restricted areas. Every gate required electronic badge access. Nothing entered or left the property without creating a digital record. Or at least, that was the idea. My patrol route took nearly an hour. I checked every trailer row, verified dock doors were secure, inspected emergency exits, monitored refrigeration alarms, recorded trailer numbers scheduled for early morning departures. Most nights, the biggest excitement was helping a truck driver who couldn't find the correct loading dock. Then came the alarm. The first time it happened, I barely paid attention. At exactly 3:17 a.m., my radio crackled. Perimeter alarm, zone 12. The alert lasted less than 5 seconds. Then it cleared automatically. I drove straight to zone 12. Nothing. The fence was intact. No footprints, no damaged wiring, no movement on the thermal cameras. I logged it as a possible false alarm. Motion sensors occasionally malfunctioned because of weather, wildlife, or electrical interference. No one seemed concerned. The following night, 3:17 a.m. zone 12. Again, same alarm, same 5 seconds, same empty inspection. The night after that, 3:17 a.m. exactly. I checked weather reports, no wind, no storms, no wildlife captured on camera, nothing. After nearly 2 weeks, I realized something I couldn't ignore. The alarm never triggered at 3:16. Never at 3:18, always. To the second. I reported the pattern to my supervisor. He reviewed the maintenance records. Everything appeared normal. The sensor had recently passed inspection. No hardware faults, no communication errors. Maintenance recalibrated the detector anyway. The alarm continued, every single night, always at 3:17. I started arriving at zone 12 before the alarm. At 3:10, I'd park my patrol vehicle nearby with the headlights off. I watched the fence. Nothing moved. At exactly 3:17, the alarm activated. The control panel displayed an intrusion warning. 5 seconds later, silence. I walked the entire fence line. Nothing. The thermal cameras showed empty ground. No people. No vehicles. No animals. The incident reports piled up. Eventually, dispatch stopped sounding surprised. Zone 12 again? Yeah, anything? No. After a month, the alarm had become a joke among the overnight crew. Someone nicknamed it the 3:17 alarm. People blamed software bugs, temperature changes, loose wiring, cosmic rays. Everyone had a theory. None explained why it happened at exactly the same time every night. I stopped relying on memory. Instead, I created my own notebook. Every alarm, temperature, humidity, wind speed, truck arrivals, employee badge activity, maintenance work, power fluctuations, everything. Weeks passed before I noticed another pattern. My scheduled patrol always reached the south trailer yard around 3:15, which meant, for approximately 7 minutes, Zone 12 received less direct observation than any other section of the property. That realization bothered me. Maybe the alarm wasn't random. Maybe someone had learned our patrol schedule. I deliberately changed my route. Some nights I'd arrive at Zone 12 20 minutes early. Other nights I'd stay there until nearly 4. The alarm still activated, always at 3:17. Nothing else changed. Then I started reviewing access logs. Thousands of badge scans occurred every night. Drivers, warehouse employees, maintenance crews, cleaning staff. Most entries made perfect sense. But several access records caught my attention. Employee badges appeared briefly at doors that no one reported using. Sometimes the same badge appeared in 2 distant buildings within impossible time intervals. IT blamed delayed synchronization between readers. It sounded reasonable. Still, I copied everything into my notebook. I wasn't trying to prove a conspiracy. I just wanted to understand what I was seeing. A few weeks later, another clue appeared. One of the thermal cameras overlooking Zone 12 briefly froze at exactly 3:17. Not every night, maybe once or twice each week. The freeze lasted only 3 or 4 seconds. When playback resumed, nothing unusual appeared. The maintenance department replaced the camera. The freezes continued, only now they affected a different camera. That made even less sense. One rainy night, I found fresh tire tracks running parallel to the outside fence. The tracks stopped near Zone 12, then disappeared onto the paved service road. County deputies checked the area. They concluded the tracks probably belonged to a utility truck. Maybe. I couldn't prove otherwise. Several nights later, while inspecting trailer rows near the perimeter, I noticed a disposable coffee cup sitting beside the fence. It looked recently discarded. No fingerprints, no useful evidence. It could have belonged to anyone. I threw it away. Still, it felt strangely out of place. Months passed. The alarm never missed a night. By then, I had accumulated nearly 100 pages of handwritten observations. Most of them probably meant nothing. But one detail continued bothering me. Whenever the alarm activated, incoming truck traffic was at its lowest point of the shift. Very few employees were outside. Most warehouse workers were on scheduled breaks. Security patrols were spread across opposite ends of the property. If someone wanted to study the facility, that would have been the perfect time. I finally shared my notebook with the security manager. Instead of dismissing it, he quietly asked to borrow it. 2 weeks later, corporate security arrived. Nobody explained why. They interviewed supervisors, reviewed months of surveillance footage, examined access records, tested every perimeter sensor. For several nights, plainclothes investigators observed the property alongside us. The alarm still activated. 3:17. Every night. Nothing. Then one afternoon, while I was sleeping after my shift, my supervisor called. "Don't come in tonight until we talk." When I arrived that evening, several members of corporate security were waiting. They thanked me for documenting everything. Then, they explained what their internal investigation had found. Someone had manipulated portions of the electronic access logs over an extended period. Not enough to trigger automated security alerts. Just enough to remove or alter certain badge records. No one could determine exactly when the manipulation had started. Or why. Did it point toward theft? There were no missing trailers, no missing freight, no evidence of sabotage. Just small inconsistencies scattered throughout months of security data. Investigators believed someone with technical knowledge had intentionally modified selected records. They never identified who. The affected employee badges belonged to multiple departments. Some belonged to people who no longer worked there. Others had been deactivated years earlier. The investigation continued for several months. No arrests were made. No employee was formally accused. Corporate eventually upgraded the entire security system. New badge readers, new servers, new cameras, new perimeter sensors. The nightly alarm stopped, at least for a while. I transferred to another facility the following year. Life moved on. Years later, I met a former coworker for coffee. We started talking about old overnight shifts. Before we left, I asked him one question. Whatever happened to Zone 12? He smiled in a way that immediately made me uneasy. You really want to know? I nodded. He stirred his coffee for a moment before answering. They rebuilt almost the entire perimeter, replaced every sensor, installed completely new software. So, he looked at me. Every once in a while, he paused. The perimeter alarm still goes off. I already knew the next part before he said it. Same zone? He nodded. Same zone. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Same time? He didn't answer right away. Finally, he smiled without any amusement. 3:17. To this day, I don't know what caused those alarms. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary technical explanation that no one ever discovered. Maybe someone spent months studying our patrol schedules and learned exactly how to exploit weaknesses in the system. Or maybe the manipulated access logs and the nightly alarms were completely unrelated, connected only by coincidence and years of working overnight shifts. I only know what I witnessed. For months, every single night at exactly 3:17 a.m., a perimeter alarm sounded for just a few seconds. Every investigation ended with an empty fence line. Every report ended without an answer. And even after the entire security system was replaced, the alarm somehow, occasionally came back. Always in the same place, always at the same time, and no one has ever been able to explain why. The last person on the camera. My name is Jason Miller. I was 45 years old when this happened, working the overnight shift as a security guard at a government administrative building in Seattle, Washington. People often imagine government buildings as busy places filled with employees, visitors, and constant activity. That may be true during the day. At night, they're almost lifeless. By 8 p.m., nearly everyone had gone home. The building, an 8-story concrete structure housing several state administrative offices, was left almost entirely empty. Only a few IT technicians occasionally stayed late, and even they usually left before midnight. My shift ran from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. Unlike mall security or warehouse patrol, my job wasn't physically demanding. Most of my night was spent watching monitors. The security control room contained a wall of CCTV displays connected to more than 180 cameras throughout the building. Every entrance required electronic keycard access. Every elevator recorded floor activity. Every server room was protected by independent alarms. Backup generators automatically tested themselves once each week. The entire building was designed to leave a digital trail for almost every movement. At least, that's what we believed. Every shift followed the same routine. I received turnover notes from the evening guard, checked active access cards, reviewed scheduled maintenance work, verified that all emergency exits were secure, monitored generator diagnostics, walked one complete patrol through every floor before settling into the control room. After midnight, the building developed its own rhythm. The ventilation system cycled every 15 minutes. Water pipes clicked behind concrete walls. Elevator motors occasionally activated during automatic self-tests. Cooling fans inside the server room produced a steady mechanical hum that became strangely comforting after years of listening to it. Experienced security guards learn those sounds. You stop noticing them, which means you immediately notice anything that doesn't belong. The first incident happened on an ordinary Tuesday night. At 1:43 a.m., I was reviewing camera feeds while completing an incident report. Camera 6 East briefly caught someone walking across a hallway on the 6th floor. Nothing dramatic, just a person moving from left to right. I looked up, automatically. That couldn't be right. The building was supposed to be empty. I immediately checked the electronic access system. No doors had been opened since 12:18 a.m., when the last IT contractor badged out through the south entrance. Every other access point remained secured. I replayed the footage. The person appeared for barely 2 seconds before disappearing beyond the camera's field of view. No face, no identifying features, just an adult wearing what looked like dark clothing. I radioed my partner. Mike, head to the 6th floor. What did you see? Possible unauthorized person. Within 2 minutes, both of us searched the entire level. Every office was locked. Conference rooms were empty. Emergency exits remained alarmed. No one. We checked stairwells. Nothing. Elevators hadn't moved. The access logs showed no activity. We documented the incident as an unexplained camera event. Maintenance later inspected camera 6 East. No hardware issues. No recording errors. No explanation. Life returned to normal. At least for a while. About 3 weeks later, it happened again. Different night, different time, same hallway. Again, the building had already been secured. Again, the access control system showed no entries. Again, someone appeared on camera for only a few seconds before disappearing outside the frame. This time, I immediately reviewed nearby cameras. Camera 6 West never captured anyone. Neither did the stairwell cameras. The hallway camera showed someone entering, but no camera ever recorded that person leaving. That bothered me more than the footage itself. Security cameras have blind spots. Everyone knows that, but not enough to erase someone entirely. The incident was forwarded to our security supervisor. He requested an audit of the recording server. Nothing unusual appeared. Frame rates were stable. No missing video, no corrupted files, no evidence of editing. Months passed before the next occurrence. By then, I had almost convinced myself the earlier incidents were simply technical glitches. Digital surveillance systems occasionally produce strange artifacts, compression errors, dropped frames, motion detection anomalies. None of those explanations completely fit what I'd seen, but they were far more reasonable than assuming someone was secretly wandering through a government building without triggering a single security system. Then Camera 6 East recorded another figure. Same hallway, same direction. Walking calmly, not running, not hiding, simply passing through the corridor as though they belonged there. The timestamp showed 2:11 a.m. The building had been empty for nearly 2 hours. I froze the frame. The image quality wasn't good enough to identify the person's face. It wasn't even good enough to determine whether the individual was male or female. Just an average height adult wearing dark clothing. Nothing remarkable. Everything unsettling. This time, corporate security became involved. They interviewed everyone assigned to overnight shifts. Myself, Mike, the day guards, cleaning contractors, IT staff, maintenance technicians, everyone. No one admitted entering the building after hours. No employee reported seeing unauthorized visitors. No access cards were missing. Nothing explained the footage. The investigation expanded. Every access control log covering the previous 6 months was reviewed. Every camera was synchronized using the building's internal clock. Server diagnostics were repeated. Network traffic was analyzed for signs of tampering. Nothing. One investigator suggested the figure might simply be a reflection from another camera angle. Another believed it could be digital ghosting, a rare video artifact created when compressed images overlapped during recording. Both explanations sounded plausible, until they failed testing. Maintenance intentionally recreated dozens of lighting conditions. No reflections matched the recordings. Digital analysts attempted to reproduce the same compression artifacts. They couldn't. Not consistently. Still, that didn't prove the figure represented a real person. It only eliminated a few possible explanations. As the months passed, I developed a habit. Every night before beginning my patrol, I noted exactly how many people remained inside the building. Most nights the answer was 0. I also kept a separate notebook listing every unexplained camera event. Time, camera number, weather, generator status, server maintenance, network alerts, power fluctuations. I searched for patterns. Some incidents occurred after heavy rain. Others happened during perfectly clear weather. Some followed scheduled software updates. Others occurred weeks after any maintenance. Nothing connected them, at least nothing obvious. The strangest discovery came almost by accident. While comparing recordings from different dates, I noticed something about the figure's pace. It never hurried. Every appearance showed the same steady walking speed, almost identical, close enough that one of the investigators actually measured the estimated stride length using floor tiles visible on camera. The results varied by only a few inches. Someone joked that if it were a real person, they had an incredibly consistent walking rhythm. No one laughed very hard. Eventually, the theory shifted. Maybe the camera wasn't recording someone currently inside the building. Perhaps it was displaying fragments of older footage because of a software error. Engineers examined the recording servers, storage arrays, backup archives. Time synchronization, nothing supported the theory. Every recording existed as an independent file. No evidence suggested older video had been inserted into newer footage. Then, another possibility emerged. What if someone had gained physical access without using the electronic security system? The investigators tested every emergency exit, every loading dock, roof access, maintenance tunnels, even ventilation spaces large enough for a person to crawl through. Nothing. Every physical inspection ended the same way. No evidence. The uncertainty became worse than any explanation. I found myself staring at camera 6 East more often than I should have. Sometimes I'd watch that hallway for 20 minutes without blinking. Nothing ever happened while I was looking. If another recording appeared, it was always discovered afterward during routine playback. Mike eventually admitted something that surprised me. I've started seeing things too. What do you mean? I'll catch movement out of the corner of my eye. He shrugged. Then I realize it's just another reflection. Working overnight for years affects people. Your brain becomes tired. You spend hours watching dozens of nearly identical camera feeds. Fatigue makes ordinary events feel unusual. More than one investigator quietly suggested that confirmation bias might explain why the incident seemed increasingly significant. Maybe we had become so focused on camera 6 East that every minor anomaly appeared meaningful. I honestly considered that possibility. Until the final audit. Nearly a year after the first incident, an independent digital forensics company was hired to analyze every unexplained recording. They examined original video files directly from the storage servers, verified cryptographic integrity, compared metadata, reviewed compression algorithms, searched for evidence of digital manipulation. The investigation lasted almost 6 weeks. When the final report arrived, everyone expected answers. Instead, it raised even more questions. The analysts concluded that the recordings appeared authentic. However, they could not determine whether the figure resulted from an undocumented software anomaly, an unknown recording error, deliberate digital manipulation beyond the limits of available evidence, or an actual person who somehow avoided every layer of physical and electronic security. None of those possibilities could be confirmed. None could be eliminated. The case remained officially unresolved. No criminal investigation followed. No employee was disciplined. No system vulnerability was ever identified. The building continued operating as usual. Eventually, I transferred to another assignment. Years have passed since I last worked inside that government building. I've seen newer security systems, higher resolution cameras, artificial intelligence monitoring software, better access control. Technology keeps improving. But whenever people tell me surveillance cameras never lie, I think back to camera 6 East. Not because I believe I witnessed anything supernatural. I don't. There are too many ordinary explanations that can produce extraordinary-looking evidence. Faulty software, human error, coincidence, and overlooked security vulnerability. All of them remain possible. What still bothers me is something much simpler. After months of investigations, interviews, forensic analysis, and technical audits, no one could answer a basic question. Who or what was the last person captured walking through that hallway after every system insisted the building was already empty? To this day, the footage remains archived. The investigation remains closed. And the final line of the forensic report has stayed with me ever since. The available evidence is insufficient to determine whether the recorded subject represents an actual unauthorized individual, a system-generated imaging anomaly, or an event that cannot be reliably reconstructed using the existing security data. I've read hundreds of incident reports during my career. Most end with a conclusion. That one ended with a question. And somehow that's what has stayed with me the longest.